In country music, 4 years can feel like a lifetime, or it can feel like the beginning of something that never fully got to breathe. For Neon Union, it turned out to be both. On April 24, 2026, Leo Brooks and Andrew Millsaps announced that the duo they had built from the ground up in Nashville was over. No dramatic fallout, no public argument, no industry scandal. Just two men who had built something genuine together, deciding, after a lot of thought as they put it, that it was time to walk separate paths. For the fans who had been following their journey since the beginning, the announcement landed with the particular sting of something ending before it felt finished. Because Neon Union wasn't a duo that had run out of steam or overstayed its welcome. It was a duo that was still climbing. And that makes this story worth telling properly, from the beginning, through the highlights, and all the way to the bittersweet ending that nobody saw coming. The story of Neon Union starts with an unlikely pairing, because Leo Brooks and Andrew Millsaps did not arrive in Nashville from the same place, not geographically, not musically, and not in terms of the paths that had brought them to the same city at the same time. Andrew Millsaps came from a small town. He described himself, in his own words, as a small-town boy from Mayberry, a reference that carries a very specific set of cultural associations in the American South. Mayberry is the fictional small town from the Andy Griffith Show, and using it as a self-description is a way of saying something clearly. I come from a place where dreams like this don't usually come true. I come from a place where making it to Nashville is already the success story, before anything else happens. Leo Brooks came from somewhere entirely different. Before Neon Union, before Nashville, before country music, he was a touring hip-hop bass guitarist. And not just any touring musician, he had been on the road with Pitbull, one of the most commercially successful artists in the world, performing for massive audiences in arenas and stadiums. That is not a background that typically leads to a country music duo. It is not the resume you'd expect to find attached to someone recording for a Nashville label. And yet, somehow, these two men found each other, found common musical ground, and built something that neither of them could have built alone. That's the thing about the best creative partnerships. They don't always make sense on paper. They make sense when you hear them. Neon Union formed in Nashville in 2022, and from the very beginning, the duo approached their career with a combination of humility and genuine ambition that set them apart from a lot of acts trying to break through in a city full of people trying to break through. Andrew Millsaps articulated the philosophy clearly in an interview from 2023. He said that some people pursue country music success as a solo endeavor, but that he and Leo were comfortable as a duo, humble and talented enough to understand the value of sharing the spotlight. That's a remarkably self-aware statement for a musician in the early stages of a career, and it speaks to something important about how they operated. They weren't trying to outshine each other. They were trying to build something together. They signed with Red Street Records, a Nashville-based independent label, and set about doing the work. The early milestones came quickly enough to suggest that the industry was paying attention and that what Brooks and Millsaps had was real. Their debut at the Grand Ole Opry in 2022, the same year the duo formed, was the kind of moment that most Nashville acts spend years working toward. Their ACM nomination came in 2024. Their debut album arrived in January 2025. By any reasonable measure, the trajectory was pointing upward. Which makes the April 2026 announcement all the more surprising and all the more worth understanding. If you're learning something new about Neon Union's story right now, go ahead and hit the like button. It helps this channel reach more people who care about the real stories behind the music. Let's keep going. There is a moment in country music that carries more weight than almost any other. It doesn't happen at award shows or on streaming charts. It happens on a specific stage in Nashville, Tennessee, inside a building that has been the spiritual home of country music since 1925. The Grand Ole Opry is not just a venue. It is the institution around which the entire genre has organized itself for a century. To perform there, especially as a new act in the same year you formed, is to receive a kind of validation that no chart position or social media following can replicate. It means someone in the inner circle of country music looked at what you were doing and decided it belonged. Neon Union made their Opry debut in 2022, the same year they came together as a duo. Think about what that timing means. They hadn't released an album yet. They were still in the very early stages of establishing themselves, and they were already standing in the circle where legends have stood, where Hank Williams performed, where Johnny Cash performed, where the history of American music echoes in the walls. For Andrew Millsaps, the small-town boy from Mayberry who had dreamed of something like this without fully believing it was possible, that night must have felt like a confirmation. For Leo Brooks, the hip-hop bassist who had navigated a completely different world before finding his way to country music, it must have felt like a rival. These are the moments that define a career, not because of what comes after, but because of what they mean in themselves. Neon Union stood in the circle. That can never be taken away. The Academy of Country Music Awards are one of the two major award shows that define industry recognition in country music, alongside the CMA Awards. Getting nominated is not a casual achievement. It means that the people who know this industry best, the professionals, the insiders, the ones who have spent their careers understanding what works and what doesn't, looked at what you were doing and said, "This is worth acknowledging." In 2024, Neon Union received a nomination for New Duo Group of the Year. That category is specifically about identifying the acts that have arrived with enough force and enough quality to represent the future of the genre. The other acts nominated alongside them were all trying to claim the same space, the new generation of country music that would carry the genre forward. Being in that conversation at that stage of their career confirmed what the Opry debut had suggested. Neon Union was not a footnote. They were a contender. They didn't win, but the nomination itself was significant enough that both members cited it specifically in their farewell statements. Millsaps describing it as a bucket list moment he could never have imagined as a kid from a small town. Brooks expressing gratitude for what the journey had produced. A nomination from the ACM is the industry saying we see you, and Neon Union was seen. For all the milestones and accolades, the truest measure of whether a musical act has connected is simple. Do people listen? Do the songs find their way into someone's day, someone's drive, someone's memory? By that measure, Neon Union delivered. Two of their songs crossed the 1 million stream threshold on Spotify. Beer Up and Bout Damn Time reached audiences large enough that the numbers became part of the story of what the duo accomplished. In the current streaming landscape, 1 million plays represents genuine connection, real people choosing your music, coming back to it, adding it to playlists, sharing it with other people. The titles themselves tell you something about the sonic world Neon Union was operating in. These are not complicated, pretentious titles. They are the titles of songs designed to be played at a certain time, in a certain mood, with a certain kind of people around you. Country music at its best has always understood that function, that songs can be companions for specific moments in life. And these two titles suggest that Brooks and Millsaps understood that tradition and were working within it with genuine affection. The fans who found those songs and made them part of their lives are the people whose loss is realist in this moment. Not the industry, not the award shows, the people who pressed play and felt something. There is something bittersweet about the timing of Neon Union's debut album, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. Good Years was released in January 2025, their first full-length studio record, the culmination of everything they had been building since forming in 2022. Debut albums represent a kind of statement. They are the moment when an act moves from promising to arrived, when the collection of singles and performances and industry buzz gets distilled into a single body of work that says, "This is who we are. This is what we have to say. This is the thing we made." Neon Union made that statement in January 2025, and 15 months later, the duo was over. The album's title, Good Years, carries a different weight now than it did at release. At the time, it read as a celebration, a declaration that the years they were living were good ones, and that the music was a reflection of that. In retrospect, it reads almost like a farewell, an acknowledgement, perhaps without knowing it at the time, that the chapter being documented was already beginning to close. That kind of unintentional poetry happens in music sometimes. The work captures something the artists themselves weren't fully aware of yet. And Good Years may be one of those cases, a debut album that turned out to also be a final statement, titled with a phrase that means something different depending on where you're standing when you read it. The joint statement Neon Union released on April 24 was brief. They said they had given it a lot of thought, that they were going their separate ways, and that the chapter was closing. 14 words to end 4 years of work. But the individual statements that followed told a fuller story. Andrew Millsaps wrote about love. He said he loved Leo, that Leo would always be his friend and brother. He talked about doing things he never dreamed possible, making lifelong memories, checking off bucket list items that a small-town boy from his background could only have imagined. He expressed gratitude to their label, to the fans, and to the journey itself, and then he said something important. He said he was ready for the next one. That phrase, ready for the next one, is not the language of someone who is devastated or lost. It's the language of someone who has processed what happened, honored what it was, and genuinely feels prepared for what comes next. There is grief in his words, but there is no bitterness. There is ending, but there is also momentum. Leo Brooks wrote with similar warmth. He said life is a journey, and he's grateful for the ride. He mentioned that he and Andrew would still write songs together, a detail that says a great deal about the nature of their split. This was not a falling out. This was two people deciding that the professional structure of the duo no longer served what they each needed, while the personal connection remained entirely intact. That's a rare thing, and it speaks well of both of them. To fully appreciate what Neon Union was, it helps to understand what each member gave up, or rather, what each member brought with them when they decided to build something together. Leo Brooks was not a country music outsider who stumbled into Nashville by accident. He was a professional musician with serious credentials in a completely different genre. Touring with Pitbull means performing for hundreds of thousands of people across multiple continents. It means understanding how large-scale live performance works, how to hold an audience, how to read a room that size. The skills required to do that job well are not simple, and Brooks had developed them at the highest level. Choosing to leave that world, or rather, to pivot away from it toward something new, required a belief that the new thing was worth building. And the fact that he found his way to country music, specifically, and to a dual format specifically, suggests someone who was following a genuine creative instinct rather than a calculated career move. Andrew Millsaps brought something different but equally essential. He brought the authenticity of someone for whom country music was never a choice between options. It was simply the music of where he came from and who he was. The small-town roots, the Mayberry reference, the bucket list framing of the Opry and the ACM nomination, these are the markers of someone for whom this world is deeply personal. Not a genre he selected, a world he belongs to. Together, they covered ground that neither could have covered alone. That's the best argument for any creative partnership. Both Leo Brooks and Andrew Millsaps were pursuing solo careers when they came together to form Neon Union in 2022. The decision to form a duo was a choice, a deliberate step toward something they believed would be more than the sum of its parts. And it was. Now, having closed that chapter, both of them are stepping back into solo territory, but as different people than they were 4 years ago. They have an ACM nomination on their resumes. They have Grand Ole Opry performances in their history. They have a debut album and million-stream singles and a fanbase that found them and stayed. None of that disappears when a duo announces a split. What it means practically is that both Brooks and Millsaps are entering their next chapters with significantly more credibility than they had when they started. The industry knows their names. The fans know their voices. The work they did together has laid a foundation that solo careers can be built on. Leo Brooks mentioned specifically that he and Andrew would continue writing songs together, suggesting that the creative relationship isn't ending, just changing shape. That kind of ongoing collaboration between former partners often produces some of the best work either person has ever done, because the dynamic shifts from joint ownership to mutual support, and both people feel freer to take risks. The country music world should be paying attention to what both of these men do next, because if the last 4 years are any indication, what they do next will be worth watching. Neon Union existed for 4 years. They released one album. They earned one major award nomination. They performed on the most historic stage in country music. They connected with fans who genuinely loved their music. And they ended things with grace, with warmth, and with their friendship fully intact. By the metrics that matter most, not streaming numbers or chart positions, but the actual human impact of the work, that is not a small legacy. That is a real one. The fans who followed them from the early Nashville days, who were in the room at the Opry, who added Beer Up and Bout Damn Time to playlists that are still running somewhere right now, those people were given something real. Music that meant something. An act that was genuine. A partnership that was built on mutual respect and shared ambition, and the simple belief that two people making music together could produce something worth hearing. Red Street Records gave them the platform. Brooks and Millsaps did the rest. And the result is a catalog that will still be there long after the announcement of the split has faded from the news cycle. Good Years is the name of the album. And whatever comes next for each of them, that's exactly what those 4 years were. Not every story in music ends with a dramatic finale. Not every breakup comes with a scandal or a betrayal or a moment of public collapse. Some of them are simply two people who built something real, gave it everything they had, and then made the honest decision that it was time to move in different directions. Neon Union was that kind of story. And in an industry that can make everything feel disposable, the next act always coming, the next sound always pushing the last one aside, there is something quietly remarkable about a duo that formed with purpose, worked with integrity, hit genuine milestones, and ended with their friendship intact and their gratitude real. Leo Brooks and Andrew Millsaps made good music. They made it together for 4 years, in one of the hardest cities in the world to make it in. They stood in the circle at the Grand Ole Opry. They heard their names called at the ACM Awards. They released an album called Good Years and meant every word of the title. Whatever comes next for both of them, and something will, because talent and work ethic don't disappear when a duo splits, the Neon Union chapter is one they will carry with them. And so will the people who were listening. Here's to the next chapter. Cheers.